Welcome to Maxara. Today's video, we are going to look at the Khamar Daban incident. In the summer of 1993, a group of experienced hikers set out in the mountains of Siberia. There were 7 of them. They were young, athletic, and trained for harsh expeditions. They had survived difficult climbs before. This trip was supposed to be routine, but within a matter of minutes, something went horribly wrong. Members of the group suddenly began screaming. Some collapsed. One of them started bleeding from the mouth and ears. Another began smashing their head against rocks. One by one, they died. Only one person survived to tell the story, and what she described would leave investigators with more questions than answers. This is the story of the Khamar Daban incident. Chapter 1: The Expedition. In August of 1993, a hiking group set out for a trek through the Khamar Daban mountain range in southern Siberia. The mountains there are vast and remote, endless ridges, cold winds, and miles of wilderness where very few people travel. The group was led by a woman named Lyudmila Korovina. She was an experienced hiking instructor. For years, she had trained young hikers and led expeditions through some of the harshest terrain in the Soviet Union. Those who knew her described her as disciplined and careful. She understood the dangers of the mountains, and she knew how quickly things could go wrong. This trip was supposed to be another training expedition. 6 of the students joined her on the journey. They were all in their late teens and early 20s, young, energetic, and eager to prove themselves. Their names were Valentina, Denis, Timur, Alexander, Victoria, and Tatiana. Together, the 7 hikers began their journey into the mountains. They packed food, warm clothing, tents, and supplies for several days. Everything they needed to survive in the wilderness. The group had completed similar expeditions before. This was not their first time in difficult terrain. At first, their journey went smoothly. They moved steadily across the slopes, stopping occasionally to rest. Sometimes they laughed. Sometimes they simply walked in silence, surrounded by the endless mountains. The weather was stable. The air was cool, but manageable. Clouds drifted slowly above the ridges. Nothing seemed unusual. Nothing suggested the trip would end in tragedy. But by August 5th, something on that mountain would go terribly wrong. Chapter 2: The Day Everything Went Wrong. On the morning of August 5th, the group continued their hike across a rocky ridge high in the Khamar Daban mountains. The sky above them was grey and heavy. Clouds drifted slowly across the peaks. Cold wind moved across the slopes, carrying the sharp smell of whetstone and pine. But for experienced hikers, the conditions were still manageable. They had faced worse before. The group walked in a line along the narrow mountain path. Loose stones shifted beneath their boots. Sometimes they had to steady themselves against the wind. Below them, the valley stretched endlessly into fog. A quiet, empty wilderness, no villages, no roads, just miles of forest and mountains. For a while, everything seemed normal. Then suddenly, something happened. One of the hikers, Alexander Krysin, slowed down. He stopped walking. At first, the others assumed he was just catching his breath. Mountain hiking can be exhausting, especially at higher elevations. But only seconds later, Alexander collapsed. His body dropped suddenly onto the rocks. The group rushed toward him. They knelt beside him and tried to lift him up. They tried to help him sit, but immediately they realized something was terribly wrong. His body began shaking violently. His arms and legs jerked uncontrollably. Witness later said he started convulsing violently, as if he had completely lost control of his body. Foam began foaming around his mouth. Then something even more disturbing happened. Blood began flowing from his ears. The group froze in shock. No one understood what they were seeing. No one knew how to help. Then Alexander started screaming. Not the kind of scream someone makes when they are injured, but a scream filled with panic, with terror, as if he was experiencing something unbearable. The sound echoed across the empty mountain ridge. Panic spread through the group. Some tried to hold him still. Others stepped back in confusion. Then, things became even more disturbing. Another hiker suddenly grabbed his throat, as if he couldn't breathe. He gasped for air, his eyes wide with fear. Then he collapsed to the ground. Moments later, he began hitting his head against the rocks again and again, as if trying to escape something or stop something happening inside his own body. Now the group was completely overwhelmed. More hikers began showing strange symptoms. Some began running, not towards safety, but in random directions. Some ran downhill across the slope. Others ran along the ridge without looking where they were going. One person tried to hide behind a large rock. Another screamed uncontrollably. Their voice carried across the mountain, echoing through the fog. It was chaos, complete confusion. Within moments, the calm hiking trip had turned into something terrifying. It was as if the entire group had suddenly lost control of their bodies, lost control of their minds. Some collapsed where they stood. Others stumbled across the rocks before falling, and then slowly, the screams stopped. The wind moved quietly across the ridge again. Clouds drifted over the mountain, and the slope became silent. Within minutes, several of the hikers were dead. Amid the chaos on the mountain, one member of the group managed to escape. Her name was Valentina Utochenko. She later said and told investigators that everything had happened incredibly fast. One moment the group was hiking normally along the ridge, talking, walking, breathing a cold mountain air, and the next moment, her friends were collapsing around her. She said the behavior of the group made no sense. Some were screaming, others were running without direction, some were bleeding, others seemed unable to breathe. It felt sudden, unnatural, and terrifying. Valentina watched as people she had traveled with for days suddenly lost control of their bodies. Their movements were frantic, their voices filled with panic. The calm mountain hike had turned into chaos in a matter of seconds. Valentina realized something was terribly wrong. If she stayed, she might die too. Terrified, she grabbed the nearest thing she could carry, her sleeping bag. There was no time to gather supplies, no time to pack food, no time to think. She ran. She didn't stop to look back. She didn't stop to help. She just ran down the mountains. The wind howled across the ridge as she moved through the rocks. Loose stones slid beneath her feet. Branches scratched against her clothing. Behind her, the mountain slowly disappeared into fog. Eventually, she found a place to hide behind large stones along the slope. There she stayed, alone. The sun slowly sank behind the distant mountains. The sky turned dark. Cold air settled across the valley, and the temperature dropped quickly. That night, Valentina barely slept. Every sound from the forest made her panic. The cracking of branches, the distant movement of wind through the trees. Every noise made her fear something might be coming for her. She didn't know what he had killed her friends. She didn't know if it was still nearby. But the mountain remained silent. No screams, no movement, just the wind. When morning finally arrived, Valentina stood up and began walking, alone, through the cold wilderness. She didn't know exactly where she was going. The mountains around her all looked the same. Endless ridges, endless forests. She only knew one thing. She needed to get off that mountain. For days, she wandered through the wilderness, weak, hungry, exhausted, her body slowly growing colder with each passing night. Eventually, after days of walking, she reached a river. The sound of moving water gave her hope. She remembered that rivers often lead to villages or roads. So she followed the current, step after step, hour after hour, sometimes stumbling, sometimes stopping just to catch her breath. Then finally, she saw people, rescuers. When they found her, she was barely able to speak. Her voice was weak, her body trembling from exhaustion. She was cold, traumatized, and struggling to explain what had happened on that mountain. 6 hikers had entered the mountains with her, but only one had returned. Search teams later returned to the mountain. Rescuers began searching the area where the group had last been seen. The terrain was difficult. Cold winds moved across ridges. Thick clouds hung over the mountains, the same quiet wilderness that the hikers had walked only days earlier. But now, investigators were searching for answers. Not long after the search began, they made their first discovery. One of the hikers' bodies was found lying on the rocky slope. Soon after, more were located nearby. The bodies of the group were scattered across the mountain. Some were lying face down in the rocks. Others appeared to have collapsed where they stood. A few were positioned in ways that suggested they had been running, as if they had tried to escape from something. Investigators carefully examined the scene. Almost immediately, they noticed signs that something strange had happened. Several of the victims had blood around their mouth and ears. Some showed signs of violent convulsions before death. Others appeared to have collapsed suddenly. There were no signs of a struggle between the hikers, no evidence of an animal attack, no deep wounds or injuries that could clearly explain what had happened. Their equipment was still nearby. Their gear remained scattered across the slope. Nothing suggested they had been attacked or chased by anything visible. Investigators also searched for signs of a natural disaster, but there were no avalanche, no rock slide, no sign that the mountain itself had caused the tragedy. The weather had been cold, but not extreme enough to immediately kill experienced hikers. Despite the disturbing scene, the official investigation eventually reached a conclusion. Authorities suggested the hikers had died from hypothermia, exposure to the cold, but many people questioned this explanation because hypothermia usually happens slowly. It does not normally cause people to bleed from their ears. It does not make people suddenly collapse within minutes. And it certainly does not cause multiple people to panic and run in different directions at the same time. The evidence left investigators with more questions than answers. What had caused the sudden convulsions? Why had several hikers appeared to lose control of their bodies? And why had the entire group descended into panic so quickly? In the end, the investigation closed without a clear explanation. The official report offered a conclusion, but the true cause of the tragedy was never fully proven. The ending. The mountain remained silent. Today, the Khamar Daban mountains remain quiet. The wind still moves slowly across the same ridges where the hikers once walked. The forests below are thick and endless. Rivers still cut through the valleys, and the rocky slopes look almost untouched by time. If someone were to hike there today, they might never realize that something terrible happened on that mountain. The place where the group died looks almost peaceful, calm, silent, but the mystery remains. 7 hikers entered the mountains that summer in 1993. They were prepared, they were experienced, and they had completed difficult expeditions before. There was no reason to believe that this trip alone would be different. Yet something happened on that ridge, something that caused sudden panic, something that caused healthy young hikers to collapse within minutes, something that turned a routine expedition into a tragedy. Search teams recovered the bodies. Investigators wrote their reports. Officials eventually closed the case, but many questions were never answered. What caused the sudden convulsions? Why were some of the hikers bleeding? Why did several of them appear to panic and run in different directions? And why did it all happen so quickly? Even today, people continue to debate what truly happened on that mountain. Some believe it was a natural event. Others believe the hikers may have been exposed to something unknown. But the truth is, no one really knows. The only person who witnessed the full horror of that day was Valentina, and even she could never fully explain what she saw. The mountains never gave their answer. They never revealed what truly happened. Today, the wind still moves across those same slopes, clouds still drift across the ridges, and the wilderness remains as quiet as it was that day. 7 hikers went into the mountains that summer. Only one come back. And whatever happened on that lonely ridge in 1993 may never be fully understood. End of case.